My sister clutched her chest and gasped, "It's my heart condition," right after I caught her stealing from my mother's purse. I watched her hand freeze halfway out of Mom's leather handbag, 3 crisp $100 bills folded between her fingers. The purse sat on the kitchen counter where Mom had left it before going upstairs to take her afternoon medication. My sister Vanessa didn't know I'd come back early from work. She didn't know I'd walked through the side door instead of the front. She didn't know I'd been standing in the hallway for the past 15 seconds, watching her rifle through our mother's belongings like a common thief. When I cleared my throat, her whole body went rigid. Then came the performance. Her left hand flew to her chest, her face contorted in what was supposed to look like pain, and she let out this dramatic gasp that sounded like she'd rehearsed it. The money was still in her other hand, visible to both of us, undeniable evidence of what she'd been doing. But instead of acknowledging what I'd just witnessed, instead of apologizing or explaining, she doubled down on the theatrics. "My heart," she whispered, voice trembling. "I think I'm having an episode. Can you get my pills from my purse?" I'd been managing Mom's finances for 8 months, ever since her Alzheimer's diagnosis made it clear she couldn't handle her own accounts anymore. My mother had worked as a high school English teacher for 38 years before retiring at 65. She'd saved carefully, lived modestly, and built up a comfortable retirement fund that should have lasted her through her golden years. The diagnosis came 3 weeks after her 72nd birthday, delivered by Dr. Raymond Foster, a neurologist with 26 years of experience who spoke in careful, measured tones about cognitive decline and progressive memory loss. Mom took the news better than I did, sitting in that sterile office and nodding like she'd been expecting it. I remember her squeezing my hand and saying she was glad I was there, glad she had family to help her through this. At the time, I thought she meant me and Vanessa equally. I didn't know yet that only one of us would actually help, and the other would see her vulnerability as an opportunity. Vanessa had been living with Mom for 6 months before the diagnosis, claiming she needed time to get back on her feet after her 3rd divorce. She'd moved into the guest bedroom with 2 suitcases and a story about her ex-husband clearing out their joint accounts. Mom had welcomed her with open arms, never questioning, always believing the best about her youngest daughter. I'd visited every Sunday for dinner, bringing groceries and helping with yard work, and Vanessa always seemed to be there, playing the devoted daughter role perfectly. She'd make Mom's favorite meals, organize her medications, drive her to doctor appointments. From the outside, it looked like she was being helpful. I told myself I should be grateful she was there, that Mom wasn't alone all week while I worked 50-hour weeks at the architecture firm downtown. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I ignored because I wanted to believe my sister had finally grown up and was doing the right thing. The first strange detail I noticed was 3 months into managing Mom's accounts. I'd set up online access to her checking and savings, and I reviewed the statements every week to make sure all her bills were being paid correctly. That's when I saw the ATM withdrawal for $800 from a location I didn't recognize. Mom didn't drive anymore, so she couldn't have made the withdrawal herself. When I asked Vanessa about it, she explained that Mom had asked for cash to pay the lawn service guy who only took cash payments. The explanation seemed reasonable. I knew Mom liked to tip generously, and $800 for monthly lawn service wasn't outrageous for her large property. I told myself it was nothing, just Mom trying to maintain her independence by handling some things herself. But my stomach had dropped when I first saw that transaction, some instinct telling me something was wrong, even though I couldn't articulate what. The second incident happened 5 weeks later during one of my Sunday visits. I'd brought Mom her favorite lemon cake from the bakery she loved, and we were sitting at the kitchen table having tea. She mentioned that she was worried about money, that she felt like she was spending more than usual but couldn't remember what she was buying. I pulled up her account on my phone and walked through the recent transactions with her. Most of them were normal: utility bills, insurance premiums, grocery store purchases. But there were 3 cash withdrawals in the past 2 weeks, each for $500, all from ATMs in the neighborhood where Vanessa's ex-husband lived. When I asked Mom about them, she looked confused and said she didn't remember making any withdrawals. She turned to Vanessa, who was washing dishes at the sink, and asked if she knew anything about it. Vanessa dried her hands on a towel and explained patiently that Mom had asked her to withdraw the cash for various things: a donation to the church, a gift for a friend's birthday, cash to keep in the house for emergencies. Mom nodded like that made sense, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She didn't remember any of it, but she trusted Vanessa enough to accept the explanation. I started keeping a closer eye on the accounts after that. I set up alerts for any transaction over $200 and checked the balance every morning before work. The withdrawals continued, sometimes weekly, sometimes twice a week. Always cash, always in amounts between $300 and $800. When I added them up over 3 months, the total was over $15,000 that had simply disappeared from Mom's account, with only vague explanations from Vanessa. I tried to rationalize it. Mom's medication was expensive. Maybe there were medical bills I wasn't aware of. Maybe the house needed repairs that Vanessa was handling. Maybe I was being paranoid and controlling, watching too closely, not trusting my sister when she was actually taking good care of our mother. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation because the alternative was too ugly to consider. The alternative meant my sister was stealing from our elderly mother, who could barely remember what she'd eaten for breakfast. I confronted Vanessa on a Wednesday evening at Mom's house, I'd brought printed bank statements highlighting all the cash withdrawals, and I asked her directly to account for where the money was going. She sat at the dining room table, looked at the statements, and started crying. Real tears, not the fake kind I'd later learned to recognize. She told me she was embarrassed to admit it, but she'd been using some of the money to help Mom pay for things Mom was too proud to tell me about. She said Mom had started having accidents and needed adult diapers that she refused to let me buy. She said Mom wanted to send gifts to her grandchildren, but didn't want to burden me with asking for money. She said Mom had donated to several charities and hadn't wanted me to know because I might think she was being financially irresponsible. Every explanation tugged at my protective instincts. I wanted to respect Mom's dignity and independence. I didn't want to be the controlling son who monitored every dollar, so I backed off. I told Vanessa I understood, but asked her to please keep better records so I could properly manage Mom's finances. She promised she would, hugged me, and thanked me for being understanding. The withdrawals stopped for 3 weeks. I thought the conversation had worked, that Vanessa had gotten the message and would be more transparent going forward. Then they started again, but with a new pattern. Instead of large ATM withdrawals, there were now checks written to cash, in amounts ranging from $200 to $600. I called the bank and learned that Vanessa had helped Mom add her to the checking account as a co-signer shortly after moving in, supposedly to make it easier to help with bills. That meant Vanessa could write checks from Mom's account without Mom's direct involvement. When I realized this, my hands started shaking so badly I had to put down my phone. I sat in my car outside my office building and tried to breathe steadily while my mind raced through the implications. My sister had legal access to our mother's money. She could take whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted, and the only thing stopping her was her own conscience. Based on the pattern I was seeing, her conscience wasn't stopping her at all. I hired a private investigator named Glenn Rutherford, a former police detective with 18 years of experience in financial crimes. I felt ridiculous doing it, like I was betraying family trust, but I needed to know the truth. I gave Glenn copies of all the bank statements and asked him to find out where the money was going. He called me 4 days later and asked me to meet him at a coffee shop near the downtown courthouse. When I arrived, he had a folder waiting for me, thick with documentation. He'd tracked Vanessa's movements using her social media posts and credit card transactions. The money she was taking from Mom's account was funding a lifestyle that didn't match someone who was supposedly broke from a divorce. Designer handbags, expensive dinners, weekend trips to wine country, a new lease on a luxury SUV. Glenn had photographed her at a high-end shopping mall, carrying bags from stores where single items cost more than most people's weekly groceries. He showed me receipts from restaurants where she'd spent $300 on meals for herself and various friends. He documented her staying at boutique hotels, getting spa treatments, buying jewelry. Every dollar was coming from Mom. I confronted her again, this time with evidence. I brought the folder Glenn had prepared, and I spread the photos across Mom's kitchen table while Mom was upstairs napping. Vanessa looked at the images of herself shopping, dining, traveling, and her face went through several expressions before settling on defiance. She said I had no right to spy on her, that hiring an investigator was a violation of her privacy. I told her she was stealing from our mother. She insisted she wasn't stealing, that Mom had given her permission to use the account for household expenses, and if she occasionally treated herself, that was her compensation for being Mom's full-time caregiver. I pointed out that I was paying for a professional caregiver to come 4 days a week to help Mom with bathing and meals. Vanessa said the caregiver didn't do everything, that she was still providing emotional support and companionship that had value. She turned the argument around, accusing me of not appreciating how hard it was to live with someone who had Alzheimer's, how draining it was to repeat the same conversations every day, how I got to go to my comfortable office and come home to my quiet apartment while she dealt with the reality of Mom's decline. That was the first time she used the heart condition excuse, though not for stealing. She said all the stress of caring for Mom was affecting her health, that she'd been having chest pains and palpitations, that her doctor had warned her she was at risk for a cardiac event. She said she needed the occasional escape, the small luxuries, to cope with the emotional burden she was carrying. She made it sound noble, like she was sacrificing her own well-being for Mom's care. I didn't know yet that she'd never been to a cardiologist, that there was no diagnosis, that the entire medical crisis was fabricated. I only knew that she was turning my legitimate concerns into an attack on her character, and that she was skilled enough at manipulation that I left that conversation feeling like maybe I had been too harsh, maybe I didn't appreciate what she was doing, maybe I should back off and trust her more. It's humiliating to admit how easily she played me that day. 3 weeks after that conversation, I found out Mom had taken out a home equity line of credit for $50,000. The bank sent a notice to her house, and I intercepted it before Vanessa could hide it. I called the bank immediately and spoke to a loan officer named Patricia Kemp, who'd been working there for 12 years. She confirmed that the HELOC had been approved and funded 3 months earlier. I asked who had applied for it. She said my mother had come into the bank with all the necessary documentation, had signed all the forms, and had seemed fully competent to make financial decisions. I asked if anyone had accompanied her. Patricia checked her notes and said yes, her daughter had been with her, had helped her fill out some of the paperwork, had explained that they needed the funds for home repairs and medical expenses. I felt my throat tighten. I asked where the money had gone. She told me it had been transferred to the checking account in 3 installments over the past 10 weeks. I reviewed the checking account transactions for the period after each HELOC transfer. The pattern was clear. Large amounts would appear in the account, then would be withdrawn in cash or transferred out through checks to cash within days. Someone was systematically draining Mom's home equity, $50,000 that represented decades of her paying down her mortgage and using it to fund a spending spree. I drove to Mom's house at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. Vanessa's car was in the driveway, but she wasn't home. I let myself in with my key and found Mom watching television in the living room. I sat down next to her and asked if she remembered taking out a loan on the house. She looked confused and said she didn't think so. I asked if she remembered going to the bank with Vanessa. She said they went to the bank sometimes, but she couldn't remember why. I asked if Vanessa had told her she needed money for anything. Mom's eyes filled with tears, and she said she was so confused all the time, that she couldn't keep track of what was real anymore, that sometimes she signed things and couldn't remember later if she'd meant to, or if someone had told her to. I hired an attorney named David Flores, who specialized in elder financial abuse cases and had been practicing law for 22 years. He reviewed all the documentation I'd gathered, the bank statements, the private investigator's report, the HELOC paperwork, and the timeline of withdrawals. He told me I had a strong case for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. He explained that even though Vanessa was a co-signer on the account and had helped Mom apply for the HELOC, the fact that she'd used the funds for her own benefit rather than Mom's care could constitute theft. He said we should file for emergency guardianship to remove Vanessa's access to Mom's accounts and protect any remaining assets. He also said I should file a police report, though he warned me that financial crimes against elderly family members were often difficult to prosecute because victims couldn't reliably testify about their own mental state or intentions. I asked what would happen to Vanessa if we pursued this. He said that depended on how much she'd taken and whether we could prove criminal intent, but she could face felony charges that carried prison time. I couldn't do it immediately. She was still my sister. We'd grown up together, shared holidays, survived our father's death when we were teenagers. I kept thinking there had to be another explanation, that maybe she'd somehow convinced herself she deserved the money, that maybe her moral compass was broken but not malicious. I decided to give her one more chance to come clean. I called her and asked to meet for lunch at a neutral location. We sat across from each other at a busy restaurant, and I laid out everything I knew: the HELOC, the pattern of withdrawals, the investigator's findings, the total amount that had disappeared. I told her I'd consulted with a lawyer and knew I had options, but that I wanted to hear her side before making any decisions. I asked her directly, had she been stealing from Mom? She denied it. She said she'd been managing Mom's finances responsibly, that the HELOC had been Mom's idea to free up cash for potential medical expenses, that the withdrawals were all legitimate costs of Mom's care that I didn't see because I wasn't there every day. She said the investigator had taken photos out of context, that the shopping and dining and travel were mostly from before she'd moved in with Mom, or were paid for by friends, or were none of my business. She said I was being controlling and paranoid, that I'd never trusted her and was looking for reasons to cut her out of Mom's life. Then she clutched her chest, her face went pale, and she told me she was having heart palpitations from the stress I was causing her. She said her cardiologist had warned her to avoid stressful situations, that confrontations like this could trigger a serious cardiac event. She asked me to please drop this, to please trust her, to please stop attacking her when all she was trying to do was help our mother. People at nearby tables were starting to stare. I felt like the villain in this scenario, the cruel brother harassing his sick sister who was selflessly caring for their elderly mother. I paid for lunch and left without getting any answers. That night, I called Dr. Foster, Mom's neurologist, and asked for a formal evaluation of her competency to make financial decisions. He agreed to see her the following week. I also filed for emergency guardianship through David Flores, providing all the documentation we'd gathered. The court scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks out. I didn't tell Vanessa about either action because David advised me that she might try to interfere or hide assets if she knew legal action was coming. Instead, I started visiting Mom every day after work, checking the mail before Vanessa could intercept anything, documenting everything I observed. I noticed that Mom had new jewelry I'd never seen before, pieces that looked expensive but that Mom said she couldn't remember buying. I noticed that some of Mom's own jewelry, pieces my father had given her, family heirlooms, were missing from her jewelry box. When I asked Vanessa about them, she said Mom had probably misplaced them, that things got lost all the time with Alzheimer's. The competency evaluation happened on a Wednesday morning at Dr. Foster's office. I picked Mom up and drove her there, telling her we were just going for a routine checkup. Vanessa had texted me saying she couldn't make it because she had a doctor's appointment of her own, which I suspected was a lie to avoid being present during the evaluation. Dr. Foster spent 90 minutes with Mom, asking her questions about current events, about her financial situation, about her ability to understand transactions and consequences. He showed her documents and asked her to explain what they meant. He asked her about the HELOC, about the withdrawals, about whether she'd authorized Vanessa to use her accounts. Mom tried to answer but kept getting confused, contradicting herself, unable to remember basic details about her own finances. At one point, she started crying and said she felt stupid, that she used to be smart, and now her brain didn't work right. Doctor Foster was gentle with her, reassuring her that her feelings were valid and that the disease was affecting her cognitive function, not her worth as a person. His written report arrived 4 days later. He concluded that Mom lacked the mental capacity to make informed financial decisions, that her Alzheimer's had progressed to a point where she could not reliably understand complex transactions or their long-term consequences, and that she was vulnerable to exploitation. He recommended that a guardian be appointed to manage her financial and medical affairs. David filed the report with the court as part of our guardianship petition. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at 10 in the morning. Vanessa received notice of the hearing through certified mail, which meant she now knew what I was doing and had time to prepare her defense. I expected her to fight it, to hire her own lawyer, to contest the guardianship. Instead, she called me that same evening and asked if we could talk in person, just the two of us, before things went any further. We met at Mom's house on Friday evening. Mom was already in bed, her routine so strict that she went to sleep at 8:30 every night without fail. Vanessa and I sat in the living room, and she told me she understood why I was concerned, that she knew how it must look, that she wanted to explain everything before the hearing. She said she'd been planning to pay back every dollar she'd borrowed once she got back on her feet financially. She said she'd been using Mom's money as a temporary loan, not a permanent theft, and that she had every intention of repaying it from her settlement when her divorce was finally finalized. She showed me text messages with her lawyer about the divorce proceedings, pointed to numbers in the settlement proposal that would give her enough to repay Mom, and then some. She said she'd just needed a bridge to get through this difficult period, and she'd panicked when I started investigating because she knew it looked bad, but didn't know how to explain without admitting she'd handled things poorly. I wanted to believe her. I wanted this to be a misunderstanding, a mistake born of desperation rather than malice. I told her that if she was sincere about paying Mom back, she needed to put it in writing, needed to sign a promissory note that legally obligated her to repay specific amounts by specific dates. She agreed immediately, said she'd do whatever I needed to restore my trust. We drafted a simple agreement on my laptop, stating that she acknowledged borrowing $63,000 from Mom's accounts over the past 8 months and would repay it in full within 6 months of receiving her divorce settlement. She signed it without hesitation. I signed as a witness. She hugged me and thanked me for giving her another chance, for being understanding, for being the brother she could count on. I felt relieved. I felt like we'd avoided a family war and found a solution that protected Mom while giving Vanessa a path to redemption. I agreed to postpone the guardianship hearing to give her time to follow through on her promise. The divorce settlement fell through 3 weeks later. Vanessa called me crying, saying her ex-husband's lawyer had found some loophole, and the whole thing was being delayed by at least another year. She said she still intended to pay Mom back but needed more time. I said that was fine as long as she stopped taking money immediately. She promised she would, said she'd find a job, said she'd figure something else out. I verified through the bank that her name was still on Mom's account and asked them to require dual signatures for any withdrawals over $100. They said they could add that restriction, but it would require Mom to come in and authorize it. I took Mom to the bank the following week, helped her sign the necessary paperwork, and felt like I'd finally put safeguards in place that would prevent any more money from disappearing. 2 weeks after that, I got a call from a collections agency looking for Mom regarding an unpaid credit card bill. I told them there must be a mistake, that Mom didn't have any credit cards except the one I managed for her. The collections agent read me an account number and said the card had a balance of $12,000 and was 60 days past due. I asked when the card had been opened. She said 8 months ago. I asked for the billing address. She gave me Vanessa's previous address, the one she'd lived at before moving in with Mom. I felt my stomach drop. I asked for copies of the statements and learned that the card had been opened in Mom's name, with Vanessa listed as an authorized user, and had been used exclusively for purchases that matched Vanessa's spending patterns: online shopping, restaurants, gas stations near where she spent her time. Vanessa had opened a credit card in Mom's name without my knowledge and had maxed it out. I confronted her that same day, showing up at Mom's house with printed copies of the credit card statements. She was in the kitchen making dinner when I arrived, acting like everything was normal. I slapped the statements down on the counter and asked her to explain. She looked at them, looked at me, and I watched her face change. The mask slipped for just a second, and I saw something cold underneath, something calculating. Then the performance started. She clutched her chest with both hands, gasped like she couldn't breathe, and collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs. She said her heart was racing, that she couldn't catch her breath, that she needed to get to the hospital. I stood there watching her, and for the first time, I didn't believe any of it. I'd seen this exact performance before, at the restaurant, in previous confrontations, and I was finally recognizing it for what it was: a manipulation tactic, a way to deflect and avoid accountability by making herself the victim in need of rescue. I told her I wasn't calling an ambulance unless she could provide me with the name and number of her cardiologist so I could inform them of her medical emergency. She looked up at me, breathing heavily, hand still on her chest. She said she'd see her regular doctor, not a specialist, that I didn't understand how heart conditions worked. I pulled out my phone and told her I was happy to call her regular doctor then. What was the number? She said she didn't remember the number offhand. I said that was fine. What was the doctor's name, and I'd look it up. She hesitated, said she'd been seeing someone new, Dr. Phillips. I asked for a first name. She said Thomas, I Googled Dr. Thomas Phillips with cardiology and our city name. Nothing came up. I tried variations. Still nothing. I looked at her and said there was no cardiologist named Thomas Phillips in our area. She said I must be spelling it wrong, that she'd give me the information later, that right now she just needed to rest. I told her the credit card fraud was the final straw, that I was moving forward with the guardianship and filing a police report. She dropped the Heart Attack Act immediately and started yelling that I was ruining her life, that I'd always been jealous of her relationship with Mom, that I was trying to control everything because I couldn't stand that Mom loved her more. She said if I filed a police report, it would destroy our family, that Mom would never forgive me for sending her daughter to jail. I told her that Mom wouldn't remember any of it in a few months anyway, and that protecting Mom's remaining assets was more important than protecting Vanessa's freedom. She called me heartless, called me cruel, called me a control freak who'd never had any compassion for anyone. Then she grabbed her purse and her car keys and left, peeling out of the driveway so fast she left tire marks on the concrete. I spent that night at Mom's house to make sure she wasn't alone. I sat in the guest bedroom that Vanessa had been occupying and looked through her things, feeling like an intruder, but knowing I needed to understand the full scope of what she'd done. I found bank statements stuffed in a drawer, showing 3 different checking accounts I hadn't known about, all with deposits that matched withdrawals from Mom's account. I found receipts for expensive purchases, jewelry still in the boxes, designer clothes with tags still attached. I found a notebook where she'd been tracking her spending, calculating how much she could take before anyone noticed, planning out her withdrawals to stay under certain thresholds. The notebook was damning evidence that this wasn't desperate borrowing. It was calculated theft, planned and executed with deliberate precision. I photographed everything, every statement, every receipt, every page of that notebook. I compiled it all into a folder and added it to the documentation I'd already given David Flores. On Monday morning, I went to the police station and filed a formal report with Detective Laura Simmons, who specialized in financial crimes and had been with the department for 15 years. She listened to my whole story, reviewed the evidence I'd brought, and told me this was one of the clearer cases of elder financial abuse she'd seen. She said the notebook alone showed premeditation and intent, that Vanessa couldn't claim she'd just made poor decisions or borrowed money with good intentions. Detective Simmons said she'd open an investigation and would likely be able to press charges within a few weeks once she'd verified everything with the banks and credit card companies. The guardianship hearing happened on Wednesday. Vanessa didn't show up, which meant she either didn't care enough to fight it or knew she couldn't win. The judge reviewed Dr. Foster's competency evaluation, reviewed the evidence of financial exploitation, and granted me full guardianship over Mom's person and estate. I immediately closed all accounts that Vanessa had access to, opened new ones in Mom's name with only my name as authorized user, and started the process of paying off the fraudulent credit card debt from Mom's remaining savings. The total damage was worse than I'd initially calculated. Between the HELOC, the checking account withdrawals, the credit card debt, and various other smaller frauds I'd uncovered, Vanessa had stolen over $85,000 from our mother in less than 10 months. Mom's retirement fund was decimated, her home equity was gone, and she was left with barely enough to cover her ongoing care expenses. Detective Simmons called me 6 weeks later. She'd completed her investigation and had submitted the case to the district attorney's office. They were filing multiple felony charges against Vanessa: elder financial abuse, identity theft, credit card fraud, forgery, and theft over $50,000. The charges carried a potential sentence of 8 to 15 years in prison. Vanessa was arrested at her new apartment on a Friday morning. I know this because Detective Simmons called to let me know it had happened. Said Vanessa had tried to claim she was having a medical emergency when they arrived to arrest her, but the officers weren't buying it. She was taken into custody, booked, and released on $25,000 bail that she somehow managed to post within hours. Vanessa called me from jail before she was released, her one phone call, begging me to drop the charges. She said I was destroying her life over a misunderstanding, that Mom would want us to work this out as a family, that sending her to prison wouldn't bring the money back. I told her she should have thought about consequences before she started stealing. She screamed that I was a vindictive bastard who'd always resented her, that she'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was, that she'd fight these charges and expose me as the controlling manipulator I'd always been. Then her time ran out and the call disconnected. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot and let myself feel the weight of what was happening. I'd just helped send my sister to jail. Our family was irrevocably broken, but Mom was safe now, and that had to be enough. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 months out. David Flores helped me file a civil lawsuit as well, seeking restitution for the stolen funds, plus damages for emotional distress, and the cost of additional care Mom now needed because her financial situation was so compromised. Vanessa hired a public defender named Gregory Thompson, who'd been practicing for 8 years and had a decent record with plea bargains. He contacted David 2 weeks before the preliminary hearing and said Vanessa wanted to negotiate a settlement. She'd agree to plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for probation and a structured repayment plan instead of prison time. David said he'd present the offer to me, but recommended against accepting it. He said Vanessa had shown no genuine remorse, had tried to manipulate her way out of consequences at every turn, and would likely violate any repayment agreement, just as she'd violated the promissory note she'd signed before. I told him to reject the offer. I wanted her to face the full consequences of what she'd done. The preliminary hearing happened on a Monday morning in a courtroom that smelled like floor polish and old wood. Vanessa showed up in a conservative dress, her hair pulled back, looking nothing like the designer clothes-wearing woman from the investigators' photos. She'd crafted a new image for the court, the struggling daughter who'd made mistakes while caring for her difficult mother. Her lawyer presented their defense. Vanessa had been living with Mom rent-free, had been providing care that would have cost thousands of dollars if Mom had hired a full-time caregiver, and had been compensating herself for that labor through the account withdrawals. He argued that the financial arrangement had been informal but mutually understood, that Mom had agreed to let Vanessa use the accounts in exchange for her caregiving services, and that my guardianship petition had been motivated by sibling rivalry rather than genuine concern for Mom's welfare. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Monica Reeves, who'd been trying elder abuse cases for 12 years, destroyed that narrative in under 20 minutes. She presented the notebook showing Vanessa's calculated planning, showed the credit card opened in Mom's name without my knowledge, showed the timeline of withdrawals that accelerated as Mom's disease progressed, and her ability to monitor her own accounts declined. She presented Dr. Foster's testimony that Mom lacked capacity to enter into any financial agreements, which meant Vanessa couldn't claim Mom had given permission. She showed that the amount Vanessa had taken far exceeded any reasonable compensation for caregiving, especially since I'd been paying for professional caregivers separately. She presented my testimony about the fake heart condition Vanessa had used to deflect confrontations, about the lies and manipulations, about the pattern of escalating theft. The judge bound Vanessa over for trial on all charges. The trial date was set for 5 months out. In the meantime, the judge issued a restraining order prohibiting Vanessa from contacting Mom or coming within 500 feet of her home. Vanessa left the courtroom without looking at me, her lawyer's hand on her elbow, her shoulders rigid with anger. I felt exhausted and hollow, not triumphant. This wasn't how families were supposed to work. But I'd done what needed to be done to protect Mom, and I'd keep doing it no matter how much it hurt. Mom asked about Vanessa sometimes. I'd explain that Vanessa had moved away and couldn't visit right now, and Mom would nod and seem to accept it. 5 minutes later, she'd forget we'd had the conversation. The Alzheimer's was progressing, her world shrinking to the immediate moment, the past dissolving like morning fog. In a strange way, the disease protected her from the pain of knowing what her daughter had done. I carried that pain for both of us, along with the anger and the grief, and the bitter knowledge that blood ties don't guarantee loyalty. The trial lasted 6 days. I testified about discovering the theft, about the pattern of lies, about the fake medical emergencies Vanessa had used to avoid accountability. The prosecutor called the bank officers who'd helped Mom apply for the HELOC, who testified that Vanessa had been present and had guided Mom through the process. They called employees from stores where Vanessa had spent Mom's money, who identified her from photos and confirmed the purchases. They called Detective Simmons, who walked the jury through the evidence she'd collected. Vanessa's defense tried to paint her as a devoted daughter who'd sacrificed her own life to care for our mother and had simply made poor financial decisions under stress. They tried to claim the notebook was just a way to track expenses, not evidence of premeditation. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they came back, the foreperson read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Vanessa's face went white, then red, and she started hyperventilating. Her lawyer helped her sit down and called for water, and I watched her gasp and clutch her chest one more time, performing cardiac distress for an audience that no longer believed her. The judge set a sentencing hearing for 3 weeks out. Vanessa was remanded to custody immediately, no bail this time, because she'd been deemed a flight risk after the prosecutor revealed she'd been researching how to leave the country during the trial. Sentencing day came on a Thursday morning in late October. The courtroom was nearly empty except for me, the attorneys, Detective Simmons, and a handful of court staff. The judge asked if I wanted to give a victim impact statement. I stood up and walked to the podium, my hands shaking slightly as I unfolded the paper I'd prepared. I talked about Mom's lifetime of hard work, about the money she'd saved by living frugally and denying herself luxuries so she'd be secure in retirement. I talked about how Alzheimer's had already stolen her memories and her independence, and how Vanessa had stolen her financial security on top of that. I talked about the betrayal of trust, about how Mom had welcomed Vanessa into her home out of love and had been repaid with systematic theft. I said that no sentence would bring back the money or repair the broken family, but I hoped it would send a message that exploiting vulnerable elders had serious consequences. The judge sentenced Vanessa to 12 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 8. She also ordered full restitution of $85,000 plus interest, though everyone in the courtroom knew Vanessa would likely never be able to pay it back. Vanessa sobbed as the sentence was read, her lawyer's arm around her shoulders, but I felt nothing watching her cry. The tears were probably real this time, but they came too late. She'd had countless opportunities to stop, to come clean, to make things right. She'd chosen deception and theft at every turn. Now she'd live with those choices. I visit Mom 3 times a week now. She's in a good memory care facility that I can barely afford with what's left of her savings. She doesn't remember Vanessa anymore. Sometimes she asks about her daughter, meaning me, not recognizing that I'm her son, not her daughter. I gently correct her, and she smiles and says, "Of course, she knew that. The disease has taken so much from her. but it's also given her a strange kind of peace. She lives in the present moment, untroubled by past betrayals or future worries. She's happy when I visit, sad when I leave, and then forgets I was there within an hour. It's easier this way, I tell myself. She doesn't have to know what Vanessa did. She doesn't have to carry the weight of that betrayal. Sometimes I think about that moment in Mom's kitchen when I caught Vanessa with the money in her hand and she clutched her chest and blamed her heart condition. That was the moment I stopped believing her completely, stopped making excuses, stopped trying to find innocent explanations for guilty behavior. That was the moment I chose to protect Mom instead of protecting my relationship with my sister. I'd do it again. Every time. Because when you see someone hurting someone you love, someone vulnerable and trusting, you have a choice. You can look away and preserve the peace, or you can stand up and face the consequences. I chose to stand up, and yes, it destroyed my family. But it saved my mother from being completely drained of everything she'd worked for. That's worth it. That's enough. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.